Personal freedoms and privacy during a national crisis.
Quote, if my students, the adults of the future, fail to understand their rights, or if they do not value their rights, then they will become more likely to surrender those rights when it appears to be expedient to do so. End quote. Bradley Avery. Should the government have the right to impose citizens to give up their rights? This is a daunting question, who many might argue is a necessary sacrifice in the event of a national crisis. However, upon the inspection of the country's past and reputation, it begs the question, should we allow measures that absolve citizens of their civil rights, such as martial law, to be a legal practice? We should be reluctant to give away our rights. Chapters upon chapters of America's history is dedicated to freedom fighters and civil rights champions, such as Martin Luther King and Cesar Chavez, who became martyrs for these laws which we are being asked to forfeit. Though there is truth to the necessity of laws such as martial law, especially in national crisis, when mobility and quick action are essential in order to save lives and respond to a crisis with urgency, it is imperative that measurements and regulations be put in place in order to prevent unnecessary citizens' deaths, abuse, prosecutions, and imprisonments. Sure, the government will claim that they just need to take away a small freedom in order to keep us safe, and that we all have to be willing to make those small sacrifices in order for the good of all. But how long does it take before they begin slipping down the slippery slope of taking away more and more of our freedoms and our privacy in order to protect us from the dangers they claim to be afraid of? We should be able to live in a country where both safety and freedom is offered. Both the citizens and the government must be complying with the law. Although it is true that during national crisis, having citizens cooperate with the government will make the process smoother, certain measurements must first be imposed on the government. These regulations should be set prior to a crisis in which the government can be held accountable of unnecessary evils after a crisis. Once you allow someone, like the government, to control you or observe you, the act of surveillance will soon become uncontrollable, that we won't be able to stop the fact that we are being watched, controlled, and threatened. Little by little, our privacy and freedom will no longer exist. Do you want to live under the eyes of the government, where you must live under their definition of right and wrong? In 1984, Julia and Winston must prepare themselves to give up their rights, commit murder, kill others, betray their country, cheat, forge, blackmail, corrupt the minds of children, encourage prostitution, but more importantly, lose their identity in order to go against Big Brother. But do their living conditions ever improve? This past September, the 2014 Iguala mass kidnapping took place in Iguala, Guerrero, Mexico, where 43 innocent students were missing. These 43 students traveled to protest against the Mexican government, which they considered to be holding discriminatory hiring and funding practices. Where am I going with this? In our neighboring country, Mexico, outrageous violence, corruption, and injustice is taking place. And where is the government? When these citizens stand up and speak up to end corruption and receive peace during a national crisis, what happens? They go missing. Do we want to continue a cycle where citizens are forced to remain silent and live with government corruption that will continue to lead to massive deaths if we give up our rights? But what about our own community crisis, which is this past May, officers shot a suspect with a taser, which resulted in a failure and the death of this man. As much harm as this man could be accused of, he did not deserve death. But what exactly happened when the people tried to stand up against the discriminatory act? Media began to address the situation in a way that favored the police department, not the way the citizens were affected. As a result, the momentum of the crisis began to slow down, people were forced to remain silent, and the officers were not held accountable. In 1984, the party spied continuously on the citizens. There was zero privacy, which led to zero freedom. Anyone who questioned the government was rounded up and tortured, brainwashed until they embraced the government as all-powerful and all-good. Giving up our freedom and privacy during a national crisis overpowers the government. What is going to stop the government from abusing this power? Quote, the party seeks power entirely for its own sake. Not interested in the good of others, we are interested solely in power. Only power. Pure power. End quote. Is the number one motivation to keep its citizens safe? Or as in 1984, is it actually only motivated by increasing power? In the 21st century, it is understood that information and data are the new battlefields of the future. Is our government wanting to keep us safe or just trying to ensure its own survival? Let's decrease the number of uneducated population and allow them to be informed on what their rights are in order to, if necessary, stand up for themselves. Receiving an education will prepare them to decide on what's best for the country, taking advantage of their rights, not giving them up. For no reason should citizens be downgraded by the government where they have no choice but to remain silent and allow the government to decide for them. If we give up our freedom and privacy during a national crisis, never again will we see freedom, privacy, and rights. It's the foot in the door phenomenon. Once they've got you in, they'll continue to pull the rope until they've dried up all your rights. It's part of our rights, as stated in the Bill of Rights, to have the last say in order to preserve our rights of life, liberty, and happiness. Before giving up our rights, let's remember what our founding fathers did for us, and the history that has been made to get us where we are today. Let their hard work and sacrifice not be in vain. Let us remember we are U.S. citizens, but don't let us forget to cling tightly to the Bill of Rights as we wrap ourselves in the flag.
Questions? There's one question, and we have to do this quick because we have one more group to go.
So based on your argument, would you say that the issue of privacy in a national crisis should be a national vote rather than a spontaneous action made by the government?
Wait, can you repeat the question?
So based on your argument, do you think that the problem of privacy being given up during a national crisis should be voted upon the citizens, like during the elections, or do you think that it should, or rather than being a spontaneous action done by the government?
Oh, well, I refer to citizens and voting because I think if we educate our population now, they'll be more informed of what their rights are. And once you have, how in the previous debates we were also talking about education, and I think education is very important in general terms as of surviving and creating a better environment, a better society. But also, if we take history classes where we are taught what rights we have as citizens, and when we go into the voting places where we get to choose our rights, we will be more aware of what our rights are as citizens and what we should be voting for in order for the, if we know if we know that the government should not be taking away our rights because it's stated in the Bill of Rights and it's stated in the Constitution, then if a national crisis were to occur, we would be able to first, as a society, impose regulations on the government so that the government, in case of a national crisis, is held accountable for their actions afterwards.
Okay, you guys should be scoring